Hey y'all, welcome. I'm Justin Dunham. I am one of the founders of Ércule, and Ércule builds content systems for our clients. We spend a lot of time thinking about what are all the questions that your buyers might have about anything related to their job, but also related to problems that you solve. And how do we build content systems at scale that answer those questions, figure out what they are, and then provide good answers to them that distribute your message, that are persuasive, that are useful. And there are lots of different practices that we cut across when we're doing this, some of which I'll touch on today. But we are always thinking about SEO, AEO, content creation, analytics, and lots of other related areas, PMM. Today, I want to talk about a type of content that can be very useful and that LLMs can be very helpful with in surfacing buyer questions and then answering them at scale, or not answering them at scale, just answering one-on-one, whatever it is. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And sales objections, like questions that prospects have in sales calls, questions that come up perhaps even before somebody actually talks to a rep, questions about very specific practices that you have around pricing or tiers or the value of your product or whatever it is. All of these are susceptible to building a content system to find these questions and figuring out ways to answer them in automated or semi-automated ways. So when we talk about content, the point is that all the value we can get from content might include SEO and LLM visibility and AEO. It might include helping people on the site and convincing them to move along the buyer journey, but it also might include creating content that's actually like directly helpful to your sales team, either before somebody talks to a rep or afterwards. Okay, cool. So the way I want to talk about this is by revisiting this practice that has become very hip over the past 6 months or so, which is let's make sure we answer FAQs on our web pages. And a lot of times when we think about FAQs, what we're thinking about is questions that people have around certain just general topics, like, oh, I make accounting software, and people are asking like, oh, how should I choose accounting software, or what is accounting software, or whatever it is. But what we can also do is find questions that are deeper in the funnel as FAQs and answer those in the right places. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. One is our really standard tooling that we use to find FAQs. I'm just going to start by way of introducing this particular tooling. So let me share my screen. Okay. And then I'll put that up here. Great. So this is a tool called N8N. N8N is a workflow builder if you have not seen it before. Gumloop is another workflow builder. AirOps is another workflow builder. These are all things that with varying degrees of flexibility and price and other pros and cons let you build complex workflows to parse and understand and find content and then do stuff with it. So this is a workflow that we have, which is our FAQ Finder workflow. And what it does is you define a place to a set of topics. And we kind of go through here. And then we're doing this thing here. It says loop over items. And loop over items is basically going through each topic that we care about. And maybe a topic is accounting software, a topic is double entry bookkeeping, a topic is how to comply with FASB, whatever it is, random topics, whatever topics you care about. So we're looping over those. And then for each one of those in this workflow, we're looking for related questions on Google and Reddit and LinkedIn and things like that. And we're scraping those sites, we're going through each topic, and we're putting them in an FAQ list. And here is approximately what that looks like. So for this particular one, you see there's a set of categories over here, and then there's a set of questions, and all these questions come from real places, like questions people have asked and maybe answered in Google results, and people also ask, and also Reddit and LinkedIn, lots of other things like that. That's all in here. Okay. But there's no reason why you can't, hold on one second. run a workflow like this on your own data and your own call recordings. So you can bring that stuff in and find those FAQs coming out of call recordings, in addition to maybe those user review sites and other stuff like that. And if we do something like that, here's what that looks like. Where, we're saying, oh, how does it do such and such? Is this a useful such and such? And focus on this first column for now. How will this feature help me, etc. Or another example might be this one. Does your product do this thing? Is your product good for this other use case? Can it replace all of our? Is it hard to learn? How accurate is it? How is it all this? And obviously questions like, oh, why don't you list your pricing? Probably, maybe you should list your pricing, but like, why don't you list your price? Why don't you list your pricing? How much do you cost? Whatever, all these questions. So these are things that come up in potentially real sales conversations. A lot of those things I just showed you are from actual call transcripts from folks that we've worked with, mostly example data, but there's some of that in there. And a workflow like the one I showed you, which is taking a bunch of transcripts, iterating through them, looking at them, looking for questions that people are asking, looking for questions that are adjacent to what people are asking. That is a great way to build a question bank of the things that are coming up most commonly. And when we step back to talking about building a content system, one of the goals of a content system is to cover as much of that surface area as possible. You could imagine that some of those things would also be very useful to have answers to, maybe even right on the site. Does your tool replace all of my other tools? Could be a great thing to expose publicly on the site, on your pricing page or your product page or somewhere else where it's appropriate in the funnel. Does your product have X capability? Ooh, we missed that one. We didn't include it on the product page, but it keeps coming up in sales calls. Great. Well, yeah, it would be wonderful if we refactored all of our pages to make sure this is answered. But in the meantime, maybe that can be an FAQ at the bottom of the page. So there's lots of ways that we can figure out where to surface that. But step one is actually knowing what those FAQs are. And LLMs can be extremely helpful in parsing the data we have, just as you would data that's available to us. It's just this happens to be private data, happens to be our sales calls and our transcripts versus looking at Reddit, looking at LinkedIn, but it's really fundamentally the same workflow. So what's nice about doing this is then you can also decide, okay, the answer to this is going to go on the pricing page, or the answer to this is going to go into a battle card. The answer to this is going to go into a whole blog post that somebody's going to take a little bit of time and that we're going to make sure the sales team has, and that's not going to show up in our metrics necessarily. It's not going to increase our LLM visibility. It's not going to increase our ranking for anything, but it will be a piece of content and message distribution that the sales team finds extremely useful and is able to send directly to prospects. So those are all the things you can do. Okay. So we've talked about the idea of finding the workflow. We went through the FAQ finder workflow. Now, I also alluded to the idea of doing this at scale, and this is harder to do, but you can do it, or at least you can get to something that is helpful. So the other thing that would be great to have is an FAQ responder, and this is what our FAQ responder looks like, where we're going through and we have instructions, and you decide on the prompt, and then what we usually do is put all those questions in the spreadsheet like you saw, and then run each one through the workflow with all of our context, with all of our messaging that we want to use, with these specific answers to these questions that are blessed. And then you can get responses and also suggested pages to put all of these on. And when you do something like that, it looks like this. Why don't you list your pricing publicly? Well, because we base it on team specific factors. Is this too expensive? No, it's not. Well, we probably are going to say that, right? Do we do as well as this other thing? Yes, we do. And here's some examples about exactly what we do and how it works. And you might want to not want to keep every one of these. Like, it's useful and important for a human to be in the loop here, and that's not going to go away. But what we want to be thinking about is how can we at least surface this stuff at scale, and how can we be thinking about how to make sure that we're covering all the questions that are out there. So that's the stream for today. Is I wanted to talk about this idea of how do you document these objections and these questions, and how do you answer them at scale. And if you think about things in terms of a content system, then you can think about, okay, we're going to build the workflows using whatever tool we want, whether it's AirOps or N8N or Gumloop or something else, to surface these, just like we would scan outside pages to find out what questions people are really asking on, say, Reddit or LinkedIn, apply them to our transcripts, grab that stuff, and then use another workflow to answer that. And the key thing there is having a context together, having somebody build, our objection responses, putting that in there. And then the way that can help you increase the value of your content and also prove the ROI of your content is not just, hey, we put this on such and such a page and it helped increase our conversion rate, which is great if you're adding something as an FAQ and it's helping more people have the conversation with your sales team. But it's also a way that you can use something like that FAQ responder workflow to generate entire articles that respond to a thing, and that then become available as collateral to be sent out or as ways of answering these things when they come up on calls. And all of those parts are important parts of the story of the ROI of content. So that's what I've got today. Sales objections, great source for questions that you should answer. Lots of ways to answer them, but building an LLM workflow can save you a lot of time here. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching. See ya.